say earlier on, I'm not going to tell you what your gender is. But what am I? Yes, you did say that. Don't worry. And I'm not going to tell you what my gender is. I do have a penis, but don't jump to any conclusions on that. I was going to start this by saying, you won't know who I am, but I'm looking around the table and I must know at least half the people in this room. And I wasn't expecting that, I really wasn't. Because the other thing I was going to say was that I'm a nobody. Right? Because I am a nobody. I mean, obviously somebody's in my family and friends. But really, if there was a who's who book, I wouldn't be in the who's who. I'd be in the who the hell are you book, right? So, because I'm not really political in nature, right? You know, I'm looking at the people around here and people that have been attending the last 3 days, immersed in changing the world and the tectonic movements of how to improve things. And I have different problems myself. The main problem I've got at the moment is this. And the reason that's a problem is because if I don't move that down and move forward when I hit the ball, my golf ball's going to fly immensely far to the right. You know? That's how superficial I am.
Very Scottish.
It is. And by the way, this has been a very golf evening, it turns out. I wasn't going to mention it in case it bored the tears out of everybody. But anyway, so my problems are incredibly superficial. And I've always been that. I blame my parents, I have to tell you. The reason I blame my parents, and it's not their fault at all. My father, in fact, was a fine, upstanding man, and although I didn't realise he went to Greenock Academy. My own father went to Greenock Academy, so I did. Very sharp man. Anyway, he was working class, and but he was smart, and he was clever, and he was industrious, and he built a company up after the war as an architect. And at the time I was aware of anything, I was living in a very fine house, a large house, in a suburb of Glasgow called Bearsden, and if you're from Scotland, you'll know that Bearsden was a very posh. You can tell, can't you? So I grew up in a very, very large house, and my father had a Jaguar car, which he renewed every 2 years. And I assumed that everybody lived in a big house and a Jaguar car, because I was blissfully unaware of anything. So I had no reason to be political or politically minded at all, because my life was a bliss. Right? However, in 1974, and I was 14 in 1974, do your arithmetic, okay, 65 now. I know it's impossible to believe. But in 1974, there was the 3-day week, right? Which is a very seminal moment in British history, of course. Don't ask me how it happened or why it happened. All I knew that at 14, we were living in candlelight a few days a week, and my father's business was suffering very, very badly. It suffered so badly, in fact, that he had to sell the Jaguar. The business went into debt, really. But we maintained the big house, and that's known in Scottish vernacular, or maybe Glasgow vernacular, I don't know, as being in a situation of having a fur coat and knee knickers, right? Basically what that means is you've got all the look of wealth and affluence, but underneath you're naked. So as a 14-year-old, that was quite a seminal moment for me, and I learned pretty much at that time that having a big house was only a big house, and having a nice car was only a nice car. And that's carried with me to this day, even though I've got a big house and a big car, but it doesn't matter, right? That experience kept going because that was very turbulent times in Scottish political history, in British political history. And in 1978, we had the Winter of Discontent, and I was interested to hear Lord Lawford about your experience as being a panda Tory, right? I was in a bar in Shanghai once, and Margaret Thatcher had just died. And there was a Geordie character in the bar, and we were looking at the television in Shanghai. And he starts going, whoa, the wicked witch is dead. Whoa, the wicked witch is dead. Now he knew me as being Scottish. I said, okay, but be careful what you say, because I actually voted for Margaret Thatcher in 1978. That was my first vote was for devolution. I was one of the 53% that never got it. But anyway, I voted for Margaret Thatcher. And there was 4 other people that I didn't know in the bar who said, I voted for Margaret Thatcher as well. 4 other Scotsmen said they voted for Margaret Thatcher. I think that at that time, and remember I was 18 from the posh part of Glasgow, my influences definitely went heavily towards blaming the unions for every fault, and it was probably quite natural that I voted Margaret Thatcher in 1978. I also voted for Tony Blair after that, and I also voted for Alex Salmond. Well, they did. I would say that out of the 3 people, 2 of them should have been in jail, and the 3rd one was provably innocent of all fault. But I'm not giving away my political affiliations in any way. Anyway, in 1970, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. Actually, I was speaking to you at the bar, you were pretty much the same as if you were in the same position in 1970, because I certainly was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. The only thing I wanted to do was enjoy myself and have fun and have an adventure. And so I decided that I went into Glasgow Queen Street recruitment office, and I announced to them that I was fit for active service and would they be happy to sign me up. And they said, oh, certainly can. Have you got any qualifications? And I said, yes, I've got 9 O-levels and 5 hires. Because I was qualified by osmosis. I didn't work very hard, I just went to the right school. And he said, well, that's good enough. Well, just turn up at Maryhill Barracks on Monday and you can sign on. And I said, fantastic. Eh? But then I had a quandary because I had to go back to my parents and announce to them that I was joining the army. Not just joining the army, joining the infantry. So anyway, I plucked up the courage, and at 1 o'clock in the morning I knocked on my parents' door, and the door said, my mother said, come in. And my mother sat up in bed, and I said, I've got something to tell you, and I sat in the bed. Now, I to this day think what she thought I was going to say was that I'm gay. I don't think that's what I thought she was doing. But actually, my father was sound asleep and didn't bat an eyelid on that prospect. But when I said, I'm going to join the army, he shot up. Screamed in anguish, and my mother had to calm him down. Right? But my mother said something very interesting. She said, but why do you want to join the army? Could you kill somebody? And I said, I'm not interested in killing anyone. I want to parachute and canoe and ski. You know? And but my mother had been in the Clydebank Blitz. So she was underneath the lift command of bombs. My father from Greenock had been in the RAF as a navigator, so they knew what war was. And that was very, very telling thing to say. Lost in my naivety at 18, but very prescient now, because there's so many people going around life now with PTSD because they didn't consider the fact that actually, when you do go to war, you're there to kill. And in politicians, I think people take young people's ambitions and gung-ho ambitions at 18 for granted and send people to war for their own reasons, and they go. And it's a tragedy. So my mother was correct. Anyway, they talked me out of that. In 2 hours I did. By Monday morning I wasn't going to sign up. So the next best thing for me was to do was a sports degree. So I did a sports degree, and that gave me all the skiing and canoeing and rock climbing, abseiling and parachuting, and I needed it. So that's what I did. But I still hadn't a clue. And for 7 years I worked in sport. It was tremendously fulfilling, because you can watch people change before your eyes when you coach them in a new sport, and when you see them flourish and you see something in front of you, develop in front of you, and change in front of you, it's incredibly fulfilling, and I don't miss any part of that. The most unfulfilling part of that was I had no money, I was absolutely skint. And after 7 years, a friend of mine a good friend of mine, phoned me up. He was a buyer at B&Q, which is the retail DIY chain, and he said, Craig, I've just been to Taiwan and I bought a load of barbecues. I'm a buyer at B&Q and they're so cheap, and I bought mountains of them. And as luck would have it, this was the sunniest summer of the year. We've sold them through, and I'm the biggest hero in B&Q. I thought that's very interesting. He said, but I'm the bigger hero with the Taiwan trading company that sold me the barbecues. They want me to leave B&Q and set up a sales office on their behalf and sell barbecues to them. And we can become a sourcing agent company. And he said, what do you think of that? And I immediately said, I haven't a clue what you're talking about, because I had no idea. But he persuaded me, he said, nobody knows about this. You just need to go down and we'll work and sell product from the Far East on behalf of the Taiwan trading company, and we'll do great business, and that's what I did. And to cut a very long story short, that's what I've been doing ever since. So for 15 years of that time, I sold into the corporate retail business, B&Q, Asda's and Tesco's and things like that. And for the rest of that time, I left that, walked away out from that situation, and I set up my own company. And I still do that. I do that, originally, the first 15 years I was down in Southampton working in the corporate business. But since then, I've been working in Scotland, working mostly for SMEs, and supplying product from China into the UK, and also Australia and other countries. So that's what I do. That has led me to a very, very interesting part of the world, and it shapes my political views, it shapes my life views. I said at the beginning that I'm not interested in politics, right? And I'm not interested in politics. But politics has a way of imposing itself on you. And all of my experiences are shaped by my life's experiences. When I look at what's happening in China, I've looked at the most colossal changes in that area. First of all in Hong Kong, then in Taiwan, and then China itself. I've experienced, I was there first, almost immediately after Tiananmen Square. China was not an open area for us. Hong Kong was burgeoning. Taiwan, when I was younger, made in Hong Kong was a pejorative term. Right? And then Hong Kong became the banking centre and massive success. When I was slightly older, made Taiwan was a pejorative term. And then Taiwan became the epicenter of electronics, a huge epicenter. Very recently, made in China was a pejorative term. And very recently I've noticed that people aren't saying that anymore, because the evidence is quite clear to be seen that it's not. Made in China is not a term for made badly. So that in my working lifetime, I've seen change all of the time. I've also seen political things change in my attitudes. Because of my experiences meeting people and talking to people and exposed to people's outlooks. When I went to, and I lived in China for a long time, right? But here, when I lived in China, I didn't fully embrace the China tourist culture, or try to really understand the culture of China in a methodical way, because I didn't have to. I was visiting 4 factories a day. I was exposed to people's life at a very basic level. I also, when I was out of the factories and not working, I was in a pub, an expat pub in Shanghai, of which I am now, and still am, a shareholder. I spent way too many hours in a bar. But a bar in Shanghai is a fascinating place because the whole world walks through a bar and is looking for a chat. And I spent an enormous amount of time with people from all around the world giving me all sorts of opinion, talking drunkenly about what their opinion in the world was. I met people that were travelling from China through the East to Europe. I met several people, many people in fact. Some of them were doing it on a bike, some of them were going and had come the other way. And remarkably, and maybe not remarkably, when I asked the people, what was your favourite place? What was the nicest place you went, the nicest people you met? A high proportion of these people said that the place they enjoyed the most was Iran. Right? Now, that's not surprising to me, but it might be surprising to somebody that lives in Glasgow or Edinburgh. That's true for my whole experiences for living abroad, particularly in Shanghai, because it's such a hot pot of people coming in. And that's what shapes my opinion, my political opinion. My political opinion of Taiwan is quite different to what the given attitude is about what's happening in Taiwan. But I work for a Taiwanese company. China did invade Taiwan. China invaded Taiwan in 1949. Most of the people that took me into China were Taiwanese companies, joint venture companies, into China because their second cousin, twice removed, lived in China. I have every faith that that situation will sort itself out, and it doesn't need us to put battleships or aircraft carriers into that region. But that's an opinion that I've got. And I would tell you something that I have to warn you about, which is a phrase that I learned a long time ago in China. Everything you know about China is true, and the reverse is also true. So what I'm saying is my opinion on it. I'm not involved in politics. You don't know me obliged to listen to me in any way, shape or form, apart from the fact that I bought you that pudding. I also say, I was going to say, I was in 1970s when I grew up at that time. It was my father was from Heriot, and I'm from western Scotland, and the political debates that we had at that time were absolutely like nothing. Absolutely nothing. So that situation or incident that people might say wasn't an incident to me. I was looking forward to that. And I wish it stayed because you get a right good ding dong. I'm absolutely sure about that, right? I grew up with that, and I'm sure you did as well. So don't be worried about that, and I don't think anybody excelled. Well, I certainly find it quite entertaining. That's all I thought, right? There's a couple of other instances that I would say that does shape my political opinions. In my late 50s, I fell in love with and met a girl in Hong Kong. And we married. And in 2016, we had a child. And then in 2019, COVID happened. So when COVID happened, I, being a sourcing company, and having a small sourcing company, and by the way, we are and always have been a small sourcing company. I've never employed more than 6 people, right? When COVID happened, I was in a very particular place, obviously, living in Shanghai. So when the first lockdown happened in China, it was very impactful to say the least. So we had to lock down with my wife, my baby, and my wife was heavily pregnant with our second child. And the news at that time was that this COVID thing was going to be dangerous. It was going to be extremely dangerous. In fact, the fatality rate was probably 10%. And like everybody else in Shanghai, I lived in an apartment block. And there would be 300 people in that apartment block. 10% rate of dying, that's 30 people. And it was a real frightening thought that if somebody got caught, it would make its way through the entire tower block and 30 people would die. That's how we felt about it. There was a lack of PPE in China at that time, and I couldn't get hold of a mask. And I can remember getting a mask and using it for too long and trying to sanitize it by putting it in the microwave, right? So it was extremely short. But that lockdown happened for maybe 4 weeks or 6 weeks. It was a short lockdown. And I thought, this is going to happen in the UK. And we are extremely well positioned to do something about it. So I gathered my staff together and I said, look, we've got to use our contacts, because I'd been selling PPE for a long time. And we contacted all our contacts for the PPE side of things, but they were all embargoed. None of them were available. But I got on my bike with one of my staff members. We went and visited all the factories that we could find that were doing masks. And it was like a chaotic situation. There was people hanging around outside factory gates with bags of money, stuffing things into minibuses. But one of my contacts from years ago had said, you've got to visit a particular factory. It's a very, very big factory. It's a new factory. And I wasn't interested in that because it was a pop-up factory. It wouldn't have enough credibility, it wouldn't have the certification, it wouldn't have the capacity. And I resisted going there. And I resisted going there for about a week and a half, and eventually I did go. And what I walked into was indeed a new factory, but it was a state-of-the-art factory. It was fantastic. Not only was it able to have the capacity to do what it said it could do, and it was going all the time, but it had test facilities, the accreditation was absolutely perfect. And so then I thought, that is exactly what is required, and I had to use my contacts in Shanghai. In that case, it was in Scottish Enterprise to say, come to this factory, film it at the factory, and have a look at that. And we did that the next day. And the day after that, I managed to get a message into Scotland through my offices in Scotland to say, the NHS, I've got a supply if you need it, but you're going to have the money in my bank now, or you're going to have no masks or any PPE until September. Now, to their credit, they actually said that, and somebody was able to vouch for me, and that's what we did. So we were the first flight in from the Far East into the UK, into Prestwick Airport. And we eventually, in the course of about maybe 2 months, or 2.5 months, 3 months, we shipped 13 747s of PPE, not just masks, but aprons and everything like that. We supplied the entire Scotland. We also supplied Wales, and we supplied New Zealand as well, right? We didn't supply NHS England because that was a very different setup, which I'm sure you're aware of. We were on a VIP list, but we didn't win the contract. The contract was lost to another company, which I won't go into, but maybe one of the good pricing that was involved in that is quite all over, right? It's a very interesting story. And we were very involved. I was extremely proud of the team that I had in China and the team that I had in Scotland as well. Delivered it on time in a very efficient way. But one of the things that it had proved to me was small works, right? And that also informs my political opinion about scale. I think the scale that you can achieve as a small country is more than you can achieve as a big country. That's my own personal opinion. I also think that this has been informed by the time that I was selling to the corporate retail section. People used to ask me, is China corrupt? And I used to say, no, it's not as corrupt as the corporate UK entity. So these are the experiences we share. But another experience that I had, my wife that I met in China wasn't from China. My wife's from Burundi in Africa, so it's the poorest country in Africa. And my wife informs me politically about things as well. They had no running water, and still don't know running water or electricity at home. And so, but she also tells me about the time in Burundi, because in Burundi they also had genocide, and they also had a version of apartheid, and that also involves shapes my political views. All of this means nothing because I don't actually do anything about that, right? Because as I say, I'm a nobody. The only thing I do is have an opinion about that. And when Tasmina asked me if I could help out and sponsor it, I was delighted to do that because, and I noticed the name of the institute. It's the Academy for cultural diplomacy. Everything I've described to you today is a version of diplomacy. Without diplomacy, the world falters and goes misshapen and people die. And I think it's incredibly powerful that what you're doing and what you're trying to do. It's a bit like golf, unfortunately. You can fix this, right? But if your hip's going that way and something else is going that way, and there's about 27 different things you need to fix before you hit a ball straight, and that's what politics is like. And I salute you for putting your head above the parapet and doing it, because I don't, right? The least I can do is buy you your dinner. And I thank you and enjoy your dinner from me. Thank you very much. The other thing is, and it's unbelievable I did, forget that. Tasmania also mentioned it would be at Heriot-Watt University. So in 1982, my brother was studying at Heriot-Watt University, actuarial studies. He was on the campus running towards a lesson, and he ran at the door and pushed the door, and there was a glass pane in that door, and that glass pane broke. And a slither of glass went through his clavicle, into his heart, and he died. He bled to death on the floor of Heriot-Watt, which is why I've never been to Heriot-Watt. But that also shapes your life, of course. Now, there's nobody in this room, absolutely nobody in this room, that hasn't faced tragedy, and I know that, because when I relate that kind of story, of course everybody's got tragedy associated very close to the family. But it does shape you. And it also puts into perspective everything that we're doing now. Because when my father said to me, at my brother's coffin, the night before he was buried, the open coffin, he said, he got us all together, we were 5 of us then, I was from a family of 6. And my father said, your brother is dead, and he cannot now do what he was going to do. So you must now live your life honourably well and do as best as you can to honour him on his behalf. And at the instant he said that, I knew that I couldn't do that, because you can't do that. So occasionally I atone for that and do something that I can do. But this is something of an atonement. And in memory of him and Heriot-Watt, thank you for hosting and being there for that. So thank you very much.